Well, shall we get to it?
Let's get to it.
Okay, let's do our first panel. So first panelist, if you would make your way to the stage. So I will let the moderators introduce our panelists formally, but our moderators are going to be Pete Skomoroch from Question Mark and Josh Wills from Slack, who you again can identify by the red hat. Welcome.
All right.
Why don't you take one of the middle bales?
Yeah.
Can we do that?
We'll do this is like a rodeo thing, right?
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Didn't really think this through, did we?
Musical bales of hay.
Hey, everybody. How's it
They're a
going?
little high.
Little high?
The shorter ones.
Oh, we're all right.
All
We
right.
can have a totally normal, non-weird conversation sitting like this. This will be
Yeah,
fun.
I feel like we're
Yeah.
posing for a high school rodeo team photo.
This is an awkward yearbook photo
Yeah.
for data scientists in the Wild West, I think.
Excellent.
So I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for everybody coming. It looks like a pretty good turnout. We are going to talk today about when good algorithms go bad. I think this is a topic that I've been thinking about for a while, and I've kind of been collecting news stories because you see these things pop up. And even this morning, I think there was another one. The one last week that popped up, which is very topical, was there are fewer Pokemon Go locations in black neighborhoods, but why, right, as a headline. Let me read a few more, and then we'll introduce our panelists. Everything we know about Facebook's secret mood manipulation experiment in the Atlantic. Traffic-weary homeowners and Waze are at war again. Guess who's winning? In the Washington Post.
Ways.
Here's another Facebook one. They come up a lot. Facebook lets you filter bad memories out of your nostalgia in The Verge. Flickr and Google had this issue. Flickr faces complaints over offensive auto-tagging for photos. That was in The Guardian. And one near and dear to my heart, because I was at LinkedIn in the past. LinkedIn called me a white supremacist. That's not a great way to start your morning. And so those are clickbaity headlines, but there's some real issues behind those. And at the root of all of those is I would say at heart a good algorithm that had an unintended negative consequence that affected people in a negative way. So that hopefully will whet your appetite about what we're going to talk about. Let's introduce the panel. So, Josh Wills.
Hi, I'm Josh Wills. I'm Director of Data Engineering at Slack. I've been at Slack for a little less than a year. Before that, I was at Cloudera for a good solid 4.5 years as Director of Data Science. Before that, I worked at Google, worked on the ad auction, I worked on a lot of data infrastructure stuff. So I've been doing, I've been experiencing the unintended consequences of good algorithms for a good solid decade now. And yeah, one of my favorite topics. So happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Tiwari, and I am currently Director of Product Management at Intuit, where I do product management and data science for our data products. Before that, I started a company called Level Up Analytics with two co-founders, and now we were acquired by Intuit. And Level Up Analytics did data science as a service for a variety of companies. And before that, I was at LinkedIn with Pete, working on the product analytics team. And I've been working at the intersection of product and data science pretty much throughout my career, even before it was called data science. So I was at AdMob and at Microsoft building recommender systems. And I have a PhD in applied physics, and this is where applied physicists pretty much end up these days, is doing data science. I'm excited to be here.
Yep. I actually have a quote about that for later. John?
I'm John Bruner, and I work for O'Reilly Media, where I oversee a handful of verticals, especially hardware and electronics and IoT, but I'm also getting into AI and chatbots with Pete. And before this, I was data editor at Forbes magazine, so I wrote about algorithms and sometimes deployed my own.
Did you write any of these kinds of stories, blasting
I never wrote clickbait. This
Okay.
is one of the things that made me an awkward fit in the press. So.
Okay. So you can represent the press, but not be of them.
Yeah, exactly. I'm much better than them.
And so I'm Pete Skomoroch of Question Mark. This is kind of an interesting affiliation. I was previously a principal data scientist at LinkedIn, where I worked on data products and some algorithms similar to the ones we're going to be discussing. And prior to that, I was at MIT Lincoln Lab in AOL Search. I was actually at AOL Search when they released user search data, which is another kind of mishap, but that's more on an operational side as a company as opposed to an algorithm going wrong. I'm currently working on a new startup. Not quite ready to talk more about it yet, but I'll leave the question mark as a symbol of mystery. So let's dig into this. So we could talk about some of these case studies. We could take any one of these and probably use up the whole hour. But it might be interesting to start by just setting the context. So this is what's actually happening here, right? So I think the first thing is to talk about, well, why are these things happening? What do we think is happening? Maybe we can take one or two of these cases. I think this is a story as old as, like Frankenstein's monster or Jurassic Park. I found an old tweet, the physics reference. Kevin Wheel was a data scientist who became head of product at Twitter, and people would always argue, why can't I edit my tweets? Why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? And his answer was kind of interesting. He basically said that beware unintended consequences from seemingly small product changes, right? So it may seem like not a big deal to make a small change to a product, but when it's like Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, he said, a butterfly flaps its wings in Buenos Aires, and then there's a hurricane, thousands of miles away. So similar things can happen with data products. So I'm going to kick it off by proposing that these things are inevitable. Like, as scientists, as you want to push things forward, these things will happen, and part of our job is going to be to manage or mitigate these things as best we can. But I'm going to argue that a lot of them are maybe a little overblown and like you were saying, clickbaity. So I'll throw it to Josh first.
Yeah, what do you want me to say?
For big hat first. So the question would be, why do you think this is happening? Take like the Facebook.
The Facebook contagion.
The Facebook study. Why did that blow up in their face?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the thing that bothers me most about this whole area right now is that I have no idea what the public will and will not freak out about. I think the emotional contagion thing at Facebook happened because it was a slow news day in December. And I'm not kidding. If you look at when that story broke, it was broken by Business Insider a couple of days before Christmas, when like literally nothing was going on in the entire world.
Could you explain what the contagion was?
So Facebook published a paper in some fairly prestigious journal, right? It was like PNAS or something like that. PNAS, if you don't know, stands for probably not accepted by science. They published it in PNAS, Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, seriously, where they had done sort of some slight, they'd done a fairly simple A/B test where they'd done like a little bit of tweaking of the sentiment of people's Facebook posts in their feed to see what their sort of corresponding sentiment of the posts they did afterwards. That was sort of the thing. They published the paper, they talked about it as a conference. I think Facebook historically had been, especially as I compare it to like the Goog, had been really, really good about talking publicly about a lot of the stuff they did, whether it was technology or experimentation or whatever. I thought they did a really, really good job of it. And it basically just completely blew up in their face this day, where I can't even remember, did they find that they could actually manipulate people? I don't even remember.
I think it was a small effect.
It was a very small effect, right? That they could control it was questionable, barely outside, like they had to do a bunch of manipulation to get the p-value to be less than 0.5, whatever.
I think the blowback, John, can you say something about the press blowback and why were people upset?
Yeah, so well, the part of the reason that they did it, it was an example of kind of the way that the story was told that went wrong on them. Because one of the reasons that they did it was to investigate this idea that people kind of intuitively understand that seeing good news from your friends makes you feel shitty. Because like your friends are doing really well and it makes you feel depressed. And there's a lot of kind of people popularly understand this to be the case with social media, that because we filter what we put on social media, everyone else looks like they're having a great time, and so we feel bad by comparison. That was part of the motivation for doing this study, and they found that, in fact, when you see positive stuff from your friends, you tend to feel a little bit more positive. So it disproved that very negative idea about what Facebook can do to you. But there were two strains of negative reaction to the study that were kind of at odds with each other. One was, oh my God, how dare you manipulate my feed and not show me everything that my friends see, which is something that Facebook has always done, though not in the context of a study like this. And the other one was basically, if Facebook has this power to make people feel good, then why aren't they using it all the time to make people feel great? Because think of how many suicides could be avoided if Facebook made people feel good. I think this was actually something.
And what about the control group? So the argument is, how dare you experiment on someone? What if someone was depressed and you put them in the control group? And showed them and made their depression worse.
Right.
So this story kind of hits on the manipulation theme, but it also, if you take it to the extreme, what should the Facebook scientists do? Should they not ask these questions? Should they not experiment? What do you think, Anu?
Yeah, I feel like data scientists get held to this really high standard that perhaps others don't, and I find it unfortunate that they can be bullied in this way by the media, because if you think about controlled studies, they do this in pharmaceuticals all the time, right? You might be in the control group for a wonder drug and you don't get it and you have cancer, and it's the same consequences. So I feel like
or worse.
Possibly much worse. So I feel like it is just unfortunate, and it forces people to be more conservative, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of your past experiences around that. Yeah. But it forces data scientists to be more conservative because they're suddenly held to this really high standard. And I feel like the best thing you can do is experimentation, right? So instead of making these assumptions or going based on assumptions that to actually do some experimentation and prove or disprove.
In this case, I think there's also a public reaction because there's different types of data scientists and data science work. There's everything from analyzing a product to see how it's doing to building algorithmic products like that do recommendations or tag photos or something, all the way to more R&D where you're probably the people working on this were doing this work just to, get the result for the paper, right? Or working with people in academia. And I think it's interesting because myself and a number of us here are more in that middle category of building a recommender algorithm or building some engineering pipeline. And there, it's like building a bridge or something. You're building a complex system that affects a lot of people. Like the bridge, a lot of people drive over it. It could fall down. But it seems like with data products, something almost always is going to go wrong when you have a large population of users. Yeah. And this is real user data. And so it seems like why are we surprised at our own biases being reflected in those algorithms? Take, for example, the Pokemon Go example, which is, Pokemon Go is in the news quite a bit. And so the story was, there are fewer Pokemon Go locations in black neighborhoods, but why? The TLDR on that story is that Pokemon Go was built on top of a previous game which had nowhere near the traction. It was used by early adopters in the tech community, and they tend to be in more white neighborhoods and more maybe affluent neighborhoods. And so there was a bias based on that initial user data, which they used to create the Pokestops. So this is a real data product. They decided to put all these Pokemon stops where you can, get power-ups and things like that. But if you live in certain neighborhoods, you can't catch any Pokemon. Josh, what's your take on why is this just inevitable because if you're building a product with user data that we're going to see this bias, or do we have a responsibility to do something to change that?
So we do have a responsibility to do something to change that. I have a favorite book. It's by Chuck Klosterman, and it's called I Wear the Black Hat, which is ironic because right now I'm wearing a red hat. But it's a book about villains. And he has this great argument in the book that the villain in the story is the person who knows the most and cares the least. So, for instance, in the Joe Paterno child abuse scandal, the Sandusky character, he's not the villain, he's the monster. He's Frankenstein. He's the Frankenstein monster, I should say. The villain is Joe Paterno because he knew what was going on and didn't do anything about it. And so if these data products are like Frankensteins, we're the scientists, right? We're the villain. We know the most and we care the least. And so our responsibility is to give a fuck, basically. It is to care a lot more than we care right now about these issues. And I mean, oh wow.
Wow,
Thank
spontaneous
you.
applause.
Thank you, Bo Corrinan. Thank you very much. Yeah, that's how we sort of solve this villainy problem. The thing that bothers me and drives me crazy about this stuff more than anything, though, is that there's actually a tremendous unseen force to not do a lot of this stuff that no one sees. It's like the CIA, right? It's like our successes are totally secret and our failures are and this is my Google story. If you guys mind me telling it, it's
Go for it. War
no,
story.
It's a war story. So back in 2009, I was in a meeting at Google, and y'all, this is like eons ago in internet time. Google had this thing called Google Toolbar. Anyone have a Google Toolbar in their browser? Is anyone here over the age of 18? Anyway, it's this thing called Google Toolbar, and it was a little plugin in your browser. And it was incredibly useful data. It was insanely valuable data about people's browsing habits across the web. And Google basically came up with an internal experiment that was essentially ad retargeting. So it was the first version of we follow you around the web and we saw, oh, you looked at this product page, we'll show you an ad for it later on. And I'm in this meeting and it was deemed that it was way too creepy to launch. It was literally, it was gonna freak people out, it was gonna challenge a very valuable source of data. Google opted not to launch it. And then a couple years later, some other company, I don't remember who the first person to do this was, comes along and launches retargeting, and literally no one cares. There's zero reaction, nothing even remotely like the Facebook emotional contagion study, right? Mm-hmm. Why? I have no idea. I have literally no idea.
What you described sounds pretty complex, so that might be one theory is that most people are not.
The retargeting thing?
There's an emotional, John, you think it's the emotional resonance of what's happening?
Mm. Yeah, there's also, people get used to, all sorts of technologies have come about that people were uncomfortable with initially, but that then started to become pretty ordinary. Mm-hmm. Ad retargeting is one of a handful of times when you realize that algorithms are watching you and responding to your habits. And maybe by that point, people had become kind of inured to this idea and become comfortable with it. If you look at the way that, for instance, when Gmail came out and it was going to be supported by ads that were based on, the text of your emails, a lot of people were really uncomfortable with that for the first 10 minutes that was being discussed, and then everyone just got over it. And I think when ad retargeting came out, maybe we had gone through enough of these fire drills where someone comes and says, oh my God, this company is taking your data and giving you ads based on it, that people just sort of didn't care.
I think there may be something else at play as well, which is when data and algorithms are used for the user's benefit versus for the company's benefit, people see the advantage of it. So I think that with Gmail or with Google in general, if the ads support what you're looking for, and it's not just seen as, oh, this is just Google trying to monetize, then people are okay with that, right? So I think that also brings about the shift in acceptance when people see that, hey, this can actually be used for good rather than just evil.
Yeah. So it seems like, I would say also with a lot of those products with Facebook, I feel like the ads are surprisingly good. And it doesn't actually bother me for the most part. I think if the ads were bad, if they were more creepy, and I'm sure in some cases they are, I think people do and will get upset, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the balance and the question is, I think what you're alluding to here is that you didn't do something because you were afraid it would be creepy, but there's obviously a business imperative. And sometimes there's also a social imperative to do something.
Exactly.
So the Elon Musk example came up, we were talking before the panel. He put out his second manifesto where he said that we have a moral responsibility to release assisted driving before it is fully ready or before it's completely autonomous. And so his argument was the good outweighs the bad. right? And that by deploying these algorithms now, the net, deaths would be lower. You could argue, like if you're a company and you're making profit, you could, whether it's a profit motive, that profit, hopefully your company is helping people, employing people, and all kinds of good things. So at Intuit, Anu, do you think this is, like, how do you think about this when you're building data products?
Yeah, so definitely working with financial data requires us to be very, very conservative because the creepiness factor and just the overall issues of how we use people's financial data is a lot to wrangle with. But our principle is it for the customer's benefit or is it for our benefit? And our founder, Scott Cook, has this attitude that we are never going to do anything that is entirely for Intuit's benefit. We will only do things with data that are for a customer's benefit. So I think that is our guiding philosophy, and that's the lens that we use for whether we're going to do something or not.
Do you think we have a responsibility to correct bias? So take the Pokemon Go example. Should that have been done differently?
Oh, absolutely. I think that as scientists, we have the responsibility to create awareness and to try to fix if we can. And I really liked, there was an article that came out by, I think, Frank Clark in Bloomberg last month, which was about how AI has the sea of dudes problem. I don't know how many
That's on my
of you
list.
guys saw
Yep.
that.
I'll put these up later, by the way.
And I thought it was great that he discussed the underlying causes for something like what happened with Pokemon Go or what happened with a lot of these other cases where either photographs get mistagged or women don't see jobs recommended to them that are high-paying jobs and so on. It's because these AI, these algorithms are being created by a very homogeneous group of people. And as long as that's going to happen, it's going to amplify some of the biases that exist. So biases exist regardless. Everyone has them. And I can describe a case when I had a very strong bias. I was actually working on a photo sharing app when I was at Microsoft. And I'm a dog lover. Every photo I tested with was featuring puppies. And fortunately, when the app actually went into production, people started sharing photos of kittens, and it still worked. But just to show you, like, it had never occurred to me to try any different kind of photos to share. And I think that's what happens is the biases of the people building these products is just going to get amplified. So it's up to us to create the awareness that these biases exist, and to the extent possible, try to fix them. Things like Textio, where they actually have created a product that uses NLP to call out biases.
Absolutely.
I think that's brilliant, and we need more of that.
We do. Yeah.
It's interesting. So you alluded to a personal case where you're building an algorithm, and you're much like an editor or a writer. You're applying. When creating an algorithm, it's an editorial judgment, right? And so thinking about the photo example, so you were talking about cats and dogs. The Google photo and the Flickr photo examples, where it was the algorithm would auto tag photos in your photo album, and for some pictures of African Americans, it was tagging them with gorilla, which is offensive and is a massive problem. And I think my understanding of what was happening. So this happens, right, when you train on large data sets, there's going to be errors, there's going to be mistakes. One of the other potential issues here is how do you test that before you roll it out to users, right? So I'd like to go into what can we do practically as data scientists to think about these things ahead of time and minimize them as much as possible, or correct if there's biases in our data set that don't reflect reality, right? So in that case, that's an obvious mistake. How could that have been caught? So this may tie into what you were saying before. When people talk about diversity in teams, if you're dog fooding within your company and you're using your own photo albums and you're all white, that's one way these things can sneak through. So a practical step there that I'll just throw in would be there are services where you can alpha test outside of your teams, and so you can pay basically trusted testers to test your apps, right? And so it's like another layer of secrecy maybe before you roll out to the wider public. And as startups, if any of you are doing data startups, you may want to think about using those kinds of things if you have a homogeneous team.
Is there a question? I guess I'm thinking of, I'm curious, so Microsoft released a chatbot on Twitter a few months ago, and the internet,
Tay.
so Tay turned it racist in about 24 hours, roughly speaking?
Twitter turned it racist.
Twitter turned it racist, more or less. So is there a sort of white supremacist service I can call to have them test my chatbot and see if they can turn it racist or not?
I think that is Twitter.
Is there somewhere I can do that?
You just put it right out on Reddit.
Just put it on Reddit. That'll do it.
But no, in all seriousness, I mean, that's another example. The enemy is us sometimes. So algorithms are embodiments of our own. Like a model is a simplification of the world, right?
Yeah.
That is useful, right, and mostly right, hopefully. Yeah. And so that's why we build them. It gives us great leverage, right? But obviously, you take Tay, which works in a controlled environment. It works. If you're not familiar with Microsoft Tay, it was basically a clone of what had worked in China. There was a bot called Chowais that would go into small group chats and act like one of your friends and comment on your pictures and things like that. But it went horribly wrong on Twitter. And that's one where you're seeing in real time these other effects that are happening all the time in algorithms that are trained offline on user data.
Yeah.
Do you think Tay, you heard a bit about Tay. Like,
Yeah.
Do you think that was avoidable as well? Or?
Well, people love trying to break things that smart people make, right? There's something like especially fun and challenging about the idea that this product is presented as the result of a lot of really sophisticated research and intelligence, and that gives you this incredible
And by Microsoft.
And by Microsoft, yeah. And it gives you this incredibly compelling thing to try to pry apart. There's a lot. I've talked with a lot of people who are making chatbots about how they avoid, getting their bots abused, and it's a topic that they're all really interested in. And it seems to come down to, not providing, not goading the users into trying to break your thing. So not providing, the suggestion that the bot will react properly to everything, not being too clever. Because if you're really, really clever, then people will want to prove that they are more clever than it.
Well, to prove that we're not more clever than the audience, maybe we should open it up to some audience questions in the time we have left.
No, you cannot have my hat. It's mine.
I already have had. So when you're discussing retargeting, my sense is that people actually do find retargeting pretty creepy, but they don't understand who to blame for it or attribute it to, so they don't feel like they can do anything about it.
Interesting. So had Google made it pretty obvious the toolbar was the vector by which retargeting was being done, there would have been a clear entity to blame and stuff like that in that place. And that
I go to a site and I see an ad for things that I've been shopping for, and I'm like, whoa, that's kind of strange. And I can figure out how that's done, but a lot of people probably, gosh, how'd that happen?
Right, exactly.
So I think that carried well through the audio, but just to repeat the question, maybe it's the case that things like retargeting are not creepy because it's amorphous and you don't know
No, it is
how
creepy.
it's happening.
It's creepy, but you don't know who to blame for it.
Yeah.
It bothers you, but there's no obvious villain to go after in the way that Facebook. That's actually, I think, a really good point.
The public doesn't know who DoubleClick is.
Right.
The way that they know who Google is.
Yeah. Exactly.
And that brings up the question around, I think you had mentioned the law in the EU that algorithms have to be explainable, maybe so that you can find who the villain really is.
Yeah, so that was one I left off the list, but that's a great thing to talk about. So how many of you have heard of this new EU regulation around explainability of algorithms? Okay. So for folks who haven't heard about it, I'm not going to do it justice. Haven't read it in depth. But the gist of it is that there's some new regulations in the EU that require explainability of certain types of algorithms. And that part is a little fuzzy to me as to where you draw the line. So what does it mean? Does Google's auto tagging of photos, does that need to be explainable why each decision was made? And so I think on one end of the extreme, I'm not saying that they're arguing for that, but on one end of the extreme, if you apply this threshold to everything, I think it grinds progress to a halt. And in your day jobs, if you're developing algorithms, can you imagine having to also make them completely explainable to a layperson? It's very hard.
Write them in COBOL. I don't know.
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah. And some of them we don't even understand ourselves. Let's be honest, right?
Most of it, actually. Most of it.
Yeah, I think many of us have been in that situation of, can you explain why this happened?
Nope.
And it's like a Columbo mystery, debugging these things. So I guess I'll stop to take another question here, but yeah. So I think that the connection between these two things is that people are freaked out about it. They don't know where to direct their anger, and so if we don't, as a group, start thinking constructively about how to handle these things better, it will be handled for us in a way that you don't like, and it will make your job difficult. Right?
Terrifies me, absolutely. But it is 100% coming. Yeah. Ugh.
Another question?
I'd love to go back. I'd love to go back to the tension that you brought up before between experimentation and unintended consequences, putting people at risk.
Yeah.
It strikes me that the kind of the ethical axis there is taking risks with other people's data. And you've got to do some of that to do anything new, but it's a little scary, it's a little dangerous. Can you speak to that? Do you have rules of thumb for when that's okay, when that's not okay?
Do you have any thoughts on ethics? I don't know if you're
You're trying to evade answering this yourself.
Yeah, what would you say from the outside? Where have you seen that work?
So the point that you made earlier, or I think it was you, made earlier about showing users that there's a clear benefit that they're enjoying out of something is probably the best way to the best rule of thumb for making sure that these things don't become unpopular immediately.
Just to follow up on that happens after the experiment, right?
Right.
You can't know that the benefit's going to arise until you've done the experiment.
Right.
So I think Facebook has an internal review board, like an IRB equivalent in some sense inside the company, and I think you'll see that at most big companies that have had some sort of PR data-related disaster. Suddenly an IRB board just pops up out of nowhere. Not sure how that happens. I'm being sarcastic about this, by the way.
No, and in the case of Facebook, I think they did have one before. It was just
And it just got approved, really?
no.
Yeah.
It was just accelerated or amplified.
Interesting. All right. I'm just generally mean to Facebook in general. What was I going to say? Yeah, I think the sad and honest answer is we just don't tell people stuff. I did way worse stuff than the emotional contagion study at Google. Didn't tell anybody about it. Didn't try to publish it anywhere. Kept it secret. That's the consequence of these kinds of things. We just don't talk about the stuff we do. Honest answer.
Yeah. While Josh is being honest, I mean, at LinkedIn, I think that we did think about this quite a bit, and I think in the case, Anu and I, when we were there, I mean, we were using user data where there were plenty of projects proposed that we don't do, right? You don't hear about those, to echo what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of values-driven companies or values-driven product design, and just to reiterate, I feel like if you're going to come up with an idea, if you're not doing it in a way that you can see a path to it benefiting the customer, then I wouldn't do it. Not just for the sake of experimentation, or find a different way to disprove hypotheses.
Yeah.
If you're going to put your users at risk.
So Frankenstein's monster, that obviously seemed like a bad idea, probably to most people. So if you have a group of people kind of looking, say, hey, is this a Frankenstein or is this?
That is the problem. I mean, the worst, least, most indifferent person in our industry sets the standard for everybody, because they will have they will always have the financial incentives to do the thing, always. And so if they don't care, the thing will always happen, and then what will happen is either it'll be a big, everyone will freak out about it, we'll get more government regulation, those people will be pariahs, or no one will care, and then everyone will pile on and do exactly the same thing, retargeting, whatever, because no one cares. Yeah. It's a weird way to operate. It's really strange we operate this way. It's like deeply disturbing, anyway.
Yeah, well, that said, I'm a little more on the optimistic side, so I do think
Optimism. Not for me.
the guy with the big hat is not that optimistic.
Yeah, what else is new? Yeah.
So, I don't know. I think we do have a responsibility to think about what we're doing and be thoughtful and think about the users. This is real user data, and we have a responsibility if we're using user data to be responsible with it, right? And I do think it's possible. I think these things are going to happen. I think the press is going to overreact to a number of them. But we can, if we don't want things like these regulations to halt progress,
Yeah.
right?
We need to police ourselves.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
Yeah. So we need a new sheriff, right? Josh, are you volunteering to be the sheriff?
I would love to be the sheriff, actually. I would love to. My
Okay.
dream job, I would go to like the federal government and the CIA, and I would just meet all of their various software vendors, and I would just fire all of them. It would be the best. It would just be like, spend weeks. I just like do sessions, just fire everybody. Oh,
Yeah.
I would love to be the sheriff. That'd be great.
Okay, so the headline here will be Josh Will says fire everybody.
Yeah,
More
and
or
then
less.
he can run for president,
Dictator.
right?
Yeah.
Exactly. I've talked to Donald Trump, see if he'll appoint me to do
Okay.
that.
I think we're out of time, so questions, we'll be mingling around outside during the breaks, and happy to talk more about this.
Bye, everybody.
Anu, John, Pete, Josh, thank you very much.